morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, all of the evidence in this case has been presented to you. It is now time for the final arguments of the attorneys. At the conclusion of these arguments, I will instruct you as to the law in this case, and then you will be taken to the jury room to deliberate upon a verdict. The final arguments of the attorneys are not evidence in and of themselves. They are given to assist you in evaluating the evidence that you have heard. The attorneys are permitted in their final arguments to characterize the evidence to you, to argue any position that may be at issue in this case, and to attempt to persuade you to a particular verdict. It's improper for an attorney in a final argument to inject a personal belief as to the truth or falsity of matters outside of the evidence that you have heard. An attorney may, however, on the basis of that attorney's analysis of the evidence, argue any position or conclusion with respect to any fact that is at issue before you. If, in the course of those facts, an attorney attempts to restate a portion of the evidence, and your recollection of the evidence differs from that of the attorney, you are to be guided in your duty to recall and recollect the evidence exclusively by your own recollection of the evidence. As with the opening statements, ladies and gentlemen, under our rules, someone simply has to go first and someone simply has to go second. So at this time, the jury is with the defense.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Christopher Lawing is an innocent man. He did not kill Lacoy McQueen. Her death is a terrible tragedy, but he didn't do it. He met her that day in Pullen Park to talk about the pregnancy, but neither one of them was sure what to do. She was getting pressure from her mom to end the pregnancy. Her mom had told her, "You are not ready, you are not ready, you are not ready." And she was getting pressure from her roommate, Stephanie Jeffries, to keep the baby. Stephanie Jeffries seemed to want the baby more than Lacoy did. Notice how she kept calling it our baby? Did you notice her Freudian slip when she said that Lacoy went to tell Chris my decision? And then she said, I mean her decision. Stephanie's mind may have been made up that Lacoy needed to keep that baby. But it's not at all clear that Lacoy's decision was made. As Chris said, she was having lots of mood swings, which is common in pregnancy. And whether or not to terminate a pregnancy is never an easy decision for anyone, particularly a talented college student who's planning to be a doctor. Stephanie and Barbara are the only ones saying that Chris was totally opposed to that pregnancy. And they both hated Chris before Lacoy even got pregnant because he was sleeping around on her and had given her a venereal disease. So we have to take everything that Stephanie and Barbara say with a huge grain of salt, perhaps even a pillar of salt. So on May 16th of 1996, Chris met with Lacoy in Pullen Park. They discussed the pregnancy. He told her he wasn't sure he was ready for a child. They both went back and forth about it. They argued. She told him he didn't understand her feelings, and she stalked off, got in a blue car with two black guys, and that's the last Chris ever saw of her. And Chris told Detective Proctor this. He told Detective Proctor that he figured she must know these guys since she got in their car. But he doesn't know for sure. He let her get in the car with possible strangers because he was, in his own words, pissed with her. And she got in that car because she was angry at him too. Had Lacoy been in a calm state of mind, she would never have gone. She would have gone somewhere to borrow a phone to call a friend for a ride. Because remember, when she left her dorm room, She only had 50 cents for a bus ride to the bell tower. She had no means to get home. She didn't have a ride home. She didn't have money to take the bus home. And she didn't have a cell phone to call for a ride. So, do you really think Barbara Hungerford and Stephanie Jeffries would have let her go to see Chris with no money, no cell phone, no car, no way home, if they were really worried about how Chris would react? Does that make any sense to you? So Lacoy's there. She's argued with Chris. She has no car, no money, no phone, and has to get back to Shaw somehow. And she was furious and wanted to get out of there right now. And she made an unsafe decision. In fact, she made a fatal decision. She got into a blue car with 2 black men and asked them for a ride back to Shaw. They probably told her, okay. And then they took her to Kittrell. One of them was in front driving the car, and the other was in back, where he could control Lacoy. They pulled off the road off of US 1 and dragged her into the woods. And right there, one or both of them probably raped her. Maybe one of them was digging a shallow grave as the other raped her. We don't know. At some point, they get startled. Maybe they hear something, maybe a hunter was nearby, who knows? What we do know is they dressed so quickly that they left behind a pair of socks and a pair of men's underwear. And they didn't hide the body very well. They just left her there in the woods off of US 1 in the Rollsville Baffalo. They left a pair of socks, a pair of men's underwear, and we actually had 3 pairs of socks there. We had 3 socks there. 1 pair of socks and another single sock with Lacoy's bones inside it. So we know that someone else was there, and that someone else was undressed while he was there. And then 9 months later, her body is discovered, but all that's left is bones. So we don't know how she was killed. We don't know if she was shot, stabbed, or strangled. We just know she's there in the woods in Kittrell with 3 socks, a pair of men's underwear, and 2 shotgun shells. And no one ever tested those socks or underwear to see whose they were. The detectives just zeroed in on Chris as a target and didn't check out what he told them or seriously consider any other leads. They figured Chris must be lying about the blue car and the 2 black men. And Chris does seem like an easy target, doesn't he? He's been sleeping around with a lot of girls. He's lying about them. So of course the police don't believe him. But that day, he didn't stop Lacoy from getting into a car with possible strangers because they had argued and he was pissed. He goes back to his dorm room. He has some girl over, maybe for a booty call, to calm himself down. And his old roommate, Jason Queen, told us how Chris basically had a revolving door for girls. He would have several girls a day, all day. That's just what Chris was doing back then. It's not admirable. It's something he did when he was a young man in college. It's not admirable, it's not right, but it doesn't mean he's a murderer. And then on May 16th, 1996, Chris's second roommate, Jason Hilger, sees some girl there for an instant, but he doesn't know who she is. He can't match her face up to Lacoy McQueen's photograph, even though the police kept asking him and showing him the photograph and saying, is it this girl? And he doesn't know. He said it might even be Stephanie Kelly if she had changed her hair. He just isn't sure. But we know from Richard Enoch that Chris has a type. And his type is slender black girls with dark skin and glasses. They all looked very similar to Lacoy McQueen and Stephanie Jeffries. So his roommate, Jason Hilger, didn't know who that girl was. It's just some unknown girl in his room, and we don't know who that girl was. It's just some unknown girl in his room. Now, Chris is still upset now, so he asks to borrow Stephanie's black Geo Metro, and she loans it to him, as she often does. He tells her he's putting gas in the tank and he's going to the store. He keeps the car for an undetermined length of time. We just don't know how long it is. And he brings it back in exactly the same condition it was when he left. It hasn't been cleaned inside or out, according to Stephanie Kelly. And the police later search that car thoroughly and find nothing. No blood, no pine straw, no DNA, nothing to show that Lacoy McQueen has ever been in that car, no fingerprints, nothing. And no mud, sand, gravel, pine straw, or little pebbles from the Roseville batholith in the tires of that car either. So we know that car has not been on that path off US 1 in Kitchener. And then when Chris gets back with the car, Stephanie Kelly is angry with him too for keeping it a bit longer than she thought he would. So now 2 girls in one day are ticked at him. But he still agrees to drive Rodney Lyles to his job. And he, Stephanie, and her little boy give Rodney a ride, I think, to Durham, and get back pretty late at night. So Chris goes to bed. The next day, he calls Lacoy. He calls her on her phone to make sure she got home okay. Should he have done it the day before? Absolutely, he should have. He should have called right away and told Barbara and Stephanie about her getting into that car with strange men. But he was upset at Lacoy, and he knew that Barbara and Stephanie both hated him. So if he had called them and told them he let Lacoy, so calling them and telling them that he'd let Lacoy take a ride with some strangers was not going to help the situation. So he calls and asks for her and is told, "What do you mean? She's with you." And again, he should have been honest about what happened. But once again, Barbara despises him, and Stephanie despises him, and now he's getting worried about Lacoy. And he knows it looks really, really bad that he met with her at the park, they argued, and then she got in a car with these strange men, and now she's gone, and he doesn't know what happens. All he knows is it looks really bad for him. And keep in mind, he's used to lying about what he's doing with which girl and when and where. So he fibs and says Lacoy never shows up. Another thing he knows, too, is if people start talking to him and investigating him, it's going to come out he's been lying about these girls, and it's going to come out for sure that he's been sleeping with all these girls, and everything's going to hit the fan. So he fibs. And then he calls again and talks to Barbara. And he thinks Barbara's messing with him, and that Lacoy is really there. He's like, stop messing with me, stop kidding around, put her on the phone. And Barbara tells her, no, she's not here. And then Barbara says she's going to file a missing persons report. And his response is, good, do that. He's worried now, but now he's caught in his lie, and he doesn't know what to do. But he gives, and then the state's made a big deal about the fact he gave Barbara the wrong phone number. Well, he had just moved about a week ago and wasn't sure of his exact number, and the numbers were pretty close. But the fact of the matter is, he was with other girls the rest of that evening on May 16th. And then he's also with Stephanie Jeffries on the 17th. She spends the night in his room. You can imagine he wasn't answering his pages, and he wasn't calling people, and he wasn't taking calls. He's been with a series of girls after he argued with Lacoy and she got in the car and left. He's been with a series of girls. So then he's in there in his room with Stephanie Jeffries. The police come knocking on his door around 2 a.m. He's caught there with another girl in his room. And he's not a stupid kid. He knows exactly how bad that looks. Lacoy is missing, and he's got another girl in his room the next day. So he lies some more, getting himself in more trouble. And Detective Privet's trying to get him to confess. He tells him that Lacoy needs a decent burial. And he gets close, and he puts his hand on Chris's knee. And all of that are special techniques designed to get Chris to open up and confess what happened to Lacoy. But Chris didn't do anything to Lacoy, so he just starts crying hard at the thought of her being dead. He also tells Detective Privet he last saw her on May 10th, and he knows that date for sure because this is the day after he moved into his new dorm room at Watauga Hall. And then Detective Proctor interviews Chris, and by now it's almost 4 a.m., and Chris is tired and confused. But Chris finally comes clean and tells him the truth, that he did meet Lacoy McQueen at Pullen Park on May 16th, 1996, that they argued, that she stormed off and got into a blue car with 2 men. He also tells Detective Proctor that she was in his dorm room about a week ago, and this is crucial. Detective Proctor takes that language about a week ago and counts back on his fingers and assumes that's May 9th, because May 16th minus 7 days equals May 9th. But from the interview with Proctor, we know it's actually May 10th, because that's the last day Chris said he saw her, is May 10th, the day after he moved into his new dorm room. So we know that Lacoy McQueen has been with Chris inside his new dorm room in Watauga Hall on May 10th. Why does that matter? Because her DNA is on his carpet. How did it get there? We can't say for sure, but we know that if she walked barefoot on that carpet, her DNA could be there. And we know if she walked barefoot and had a cut or scrape on her foot, her DNA and her blood could be there. And we know that if she had intercourse with Chris in Watauga Hall on May 10th and spotted a bit of blood afterwards due to her pregnancy, her blood and her DNA could be on the floor. And you know where they would be? Right next to the bed, in that tiny spot you saw cut out of the carpet. Now, you heard from the gentleman, the doctor from the chief medical examiner's office, who's done some rotations in medical school, that when women are pregnant, it's probably true that they may spot during the first trimester. And spot means have little spots of blood. I don't mean to be crude or offend anyone, but any woman who has monthly cycles knows that sometimes you get out of a shower, you walk out into your bathroom, and you're going to spot a little blood on the floor. Again, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be crude, but that's the reality of being a female. And when you're pregnant, the same thing happens occasionally, particularly after you've had intercourse. If the penis hits the cervix, as occasionally happens, you're going to see some spotting. So if she had sex with Chris in his room on May 10th and stepped out of bed naked and spotted some blood, that would not be at all unusual. And the DA is probably going to say, well, why would she have had sex with Chris on May 10th? You know, they were arguing about this pregnancy. You know, their relationship was getting a bit rocky. You'd say, why would she have had sex with him on May 10th? Well, let's be realistic here. Chris had a way with the ladies. He could probably charm the panties off a nun. It's not that unusual to think he had sex with Lacoy on May 10th. Even if they didn't have sex, if she had a scrape on her foot and walked barefoot on that room, her DNA could be there. And what the DNA experts can tell us, they did great work. They can definitely tell us that her DNA is there. But it's meaningless because they can't tell us when that DNA got there. They can't tell us if it's May 16th or May 10th, and they can't tell us from what part of her body it's from, and they can't tell us from how it got there. And you heard one of the detectives note in his report that there was no pattern of blood, no blood pattern. And the reason that's important is because you can actually do something called blood spatter analysis, where you look at the patterns of blood. For example, if someone, God forbid, but if someone gets stabbed with a knife, when the knife pulls back out of the wound, it spatters blood in a line on the floor, on the walls, wherever. And that's not what you see here. You see basically a spot of blood. And they didn't actually even test that blood to be sure, test that substance to be sure it was blood. They just assumed. They did a presumptive test at the scene, but they could have done further testing, and they didn't. And Mr. Latour didn't want you to see that carpet, did he? He didn't show you that carpet. I showed you that carpet. You know why Mr. Latour didn't want you to see that carpet? Because you would have seen there was nothing to see on that carpet. Several witnesses of the state testified to visible bloodstains on that carpet. You saw that carpet. You saw there was nothing there. And I'm the one who had to show you that. So Detective Grody then sent these carpet squares off to be analyzed at a lab. But the most those DNA analysts can tell you, again, is that her DNA is there, and some people, there may be blood there. We also saw 3 or more other people's DNA there, and we don't know how that got there. All we know is that the DA didn't fully test the carpet for blood. He just assumed, or did he? Did he test it for blood and just not want you to know the results? Or did he not bother testing it for blood? And if so, why not? You can infer from the fact he didn't show you any blood test results that he didn't want you to see those, just like he didn't want you to see the carpet. He just wants you to trust his detectives when they tell you what they saw. But you also heard how Detective Proctor lied to Chris when he questioned Chris on May 18th. He admitted on the stand that he lied to Chris on May 18th. And you actually heard Detective Grody. You can infer that you heard Detective Grody lie on the stand right in front of you when he denied that he tried to get Chris's friend to question him and report back to the detectives. Detective Grody put his hand on the Bible and he swore to tell you the truth, and then he lied to you. He told you he most certainly did not try to use Chris's friend as an agent, and that was a heinous allegation. Then I read him his own report, where he did exactly that. On December 3rd, 1996, Detective Grody interviewed Chris's friend, Carl Spencer, and in his own report, Detective Grody wrote, "We put this on you because you're a friend of his and we're soliciting your help to help locate her and put Chris away." And that's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. That's why you're down here. We're soliciting your help. You may not come out and ask him right away, but if you do, that's bold, because that's what we want you to do. And see what kind of reaction he gets. And you saw Detective Grody turn bright red as he tried to explain away his lie. Detective Grody locked in on Chris like a bloodhound the day after Lacoy went missing and continued to hound him for 20 years. He ambushed Chris outside his classes, following Chris around campus and asking questions about Lacoy in public. When Chris finally got a lawyer to end the harassment, Detective Grody still wouldn't leave Chris alone. He continued to stalk and harass Chris even after Chris told him to talk to his lawyer. Detective Grody was sure he had his man, and he wasn't going to leave Chris alone or seriously consider any other leads. Detective Grody harassed Chris for almost 20 years. For 20 years, he tried to build a case against Chris, but there was never enough evidence. What does that tell you? It would tell a reasonable person that Chris didn't do it. But that wasn't enough for Detective Grody. He finally retires, and he passes the case to Detective Falk, who had the bright idea to bring in a geologist. So Detective Falk gives a pair of Coleman boots to Miss Hannah Heather. These boots were seized from Chris's closet during the search of his room that Detective Grody did along with CCBI agents Belk and Hensley. But, you know what? It doesn't really matter, because there isn't a shred of evidence to say that Chris actually wore those boots on May 16th, 1996. They just seized a random pair of boots that were sitting in his closet. What does that have to do with May 16th, 1996? Nothing, as far as we know. But Miss Hannah looks at Chris's boots, which Detective Falk has given to her, and she sees two tiny pebbles in those boots. She takes them out and photographs them under a microscope. Then, 2 months later, she goes out to the body retrieval site in Kittrell and Vance County, again with Detective Falk and some other people from the police office, and she chooses her rock samples in Kittrell, already knowing what she needs those samples to look like. If she had been a true, neutral scientist, she would have collected rock samples from many, many different locations before looking at the rocks in his boot. Then she would have compared those samples to the pebbles from Chris's boot. But instead, Detective Falk gave Miss Hannah the boots with the rocks first, takes her to Kittrell, and shows her where to look. Exactly where to look. And she goes there knowing exactly what kind of rocks she's looking for. So it should come as no surprise that she finds rocks that are visually consistent. And you know what that actually means? Rocks that look alike. She and the DA are trying to trick you into thinking that rocks are like fingerprints. They want you to think that the rocks in Chris's boots are a match for the rocks from Kittrell and nowhere else. But that's not the truth. And that's not what Miss Hannah's report actually says. What her report says, in layperson's terms, is that the rocks in Chris's boots look like rocks from the Roseville granite. And we learned that the Roseville granite occurs in a kind of rock body known as a pluton. And according to geologists, bigger plutons are honored by being called batholiths. The Roseville batholiths encompass over 600 square miles. And let me show you that again. This pink area, right here, is the Roseville batholith. It encompasses over 600 square miles. To put that in perspective, the area of Raleigh within the inner belt line is approximately 40 square miles. So the Roseville batholith occupies an area equal to 15 times as much as Raleigh inside the inner beltline. Many of you drive around the beltline around Raleigh and know that it takes a long time. Yet, with that long drive, you have only, and assuming you circle the entire beltline, you have only circled an area that is 1/15 the size of the Roseville batholith. And again, all Ms. Hama's report actually says is the pebbles on the boot look like they came from the Roseville batholith. Nothing more, nothing less. Ms. Hannah didn't want you to look at this geologic map of North Carolina that her own office made. You know why not? Because when you see the map her office made, you can see that the Roseville batholith is huge, over 600 square miles. You can also see that what the purpose of this map is that it divides the state into plutons and batholiths, and what those are areas of rock with the same minerals, textures, and properties. And that's why this area has been divided in this way by her office. What this map says is that this pink area here, the Roseville batholith, is composed mostly of rocks that are visually consistent, look the same, and have the same textures, minerals, and properties. And Miss Hannah didn't want you to know that. If you look closely on this map, you can see that it actually includes East Raleigh in the Roseville. You can see that Clayton and Garner are in the Roseville batholith. It goes all the way north up to Henderson. So Miss Hannah can tell you no more than that the two tiny pebbles in Chris's boots look like rocks in the Roseville batholith, which covers an area 15 times greater than that of Raleigh inside the beltline. But Miss Hannah didn't like this map I was showing you because it's the only map available that shows the entire Roseville batholith. She argues that she likes more detailed maps. Unfortunately, the smaller maps that Miss Hannah claims she prefers are only able to show you a fraction of the Roseville batholith because it is just that big. And she also didn't want you to see this map because it shows you how her office divided up the state into zones of rocks that are visually consistent with each other. Most rocks in the Roseville batholith look like other rocks in the Roseville batholith. And the DA didn't even want you to see those rocks, did he? Because then you would realize how tiny those rocks are. They don't want you to know that those two minuscule rocks from Chris's boots are visually consistent with other portions of the Roseville batholith. They want you to believe the pebbles they found in the boots are so unique that they could only have come from one small patch of land in Vance County. But despite the DA trying his hardest to get Miss Hannah to say that, she never actually did. She never said it on the witness stand. She never said it on the report. All she could say, was that the pebble was visually consistent with rocks from the Roseville batholith. That is, it looked like rocks from the Roseville batholith. And that's basically meaningless because of the size of the Roseville batholith and the fact that most rocks within the Roseville batholith would be visually consistent or look like the rocks from Chris's boots. But once again, we don't even know if he wore those boots on May 16th. There's not a shred of evidence to say that. But Miss Hannah and the DA want you to think that her comparison of these tiny pebbles is somehow meaningful. And you know what? Those tiny pebbles are why Chris is in jail today. For almost 20 years, there wasn't enough evidence for the case to go forward in court. Then Detective Falk takes over after Detective Grody retires, and Detective Falk gets the bright idea to throw a geologist at the case. He arrests Chris in December of 2014. Chris spends over a year in jail. And then the DA throws this mess up in front of you all and hopes that something sticks. But the DA didn't even want you to see all the evidence. He didn't want you to see the pebbles. He didn't want you to see the boots. He didn't want you to see the carpet, and he sure as heck didn't want you to see that map. And there are two colorful words I could use to describe science like this, but I don't think Judge Ofalu would approve of me using that sort of language in court. So I will use two other words that mean The exact same thing. Junk science. The state has taken a weak case that didn't have enough evidence for almost 20 years and thrown a geologist at it to try and confuse you. But if you've read the paper over the last few years, you've seen the state do this time and again. You've seen innocent men like Greg Taylor spend 18 years in jail because this DA's office used junk science to convict them. You've also read it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you. We would just ask you to recollect your memory of newspaper articles. Don't let Chris Lawing be another innocent man railroaded by junk science. If he's convicted of first-degree murder, he will receive a life sentence. There is no other choice. It will be a life sentence without parole. He won't leave the prison until they carry him out of there in a box. If he's convicted of second-degree murder, he could receive up to 24 years in prison. And this is why it's so important for you to deliberate carefully and think long and hard about this, because his life is basically on the line. Now, Mr. Latour is going to tell you how you should convict Christopher Lawing to bring closure to Lacoy McQueen's family and friends. And once again, her death is a terrible tragedy. But Mr. Latour is asking you to convict an innocent man because he can't find the guilty ones. And that's not right. That's not how our justice system works. You cannot convict anyone unless the state can totally satisfy you or entirely convince you they are guilty. We all have that right. It protects every one of us and our loved ones. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you to find Christopher Lawing not guilty because he did not murder Lacoy McQueen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Jury's in the state.
Thank you, Your Honor. If I may have one moment.
Yes, sir.
Judge, should I get that out of his way?
Yes, please.
That's fine.
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Judge, is it all right if I move so I can see?
Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, thank you for your patience. I want to start out by saying that Ms. Visser got about one thing right in that argument. And the one thing she got right was that Lacoy McQueen made a fatal decision on that day, May the 16th. What she got wrong about that fatal decision is what the decision was. What she'll tell you is the fatal decision that was made by Lacoy McQueen on May the 16th of 1996 was getting in a blue car with two black guys. The real fatal decision that Lacoy McQueen made was going to see Chris Lawing that day, knowing that he was pissed off, in his own words, that she was going to keep that baby. That's the fatal decision that she made. And I guess you could extrapolate from that and go back a little bit further and say the real fatal decision she made was even meeting Chris Lawing and getting in a relationship with him, much less having sex with the man and getting pregnant with his child. Because what she would grow to know about Chris Lawing is what you all have grown to know about Chris Lawing over the last week. Unfortunately for her, it cost her her life, and it cost her the life of her unborn child to get to know Chris Lawing. Chris Lawing was a calculating man, a man who did not want this baby, and a man who had his mind made up that he was going to get rid of this baby no matter how much he had to do to get it done. Now, you've heard a lot about Chris Lawing, and I'm going to show you this. This is Lacoy McQueen, okay? Over the last week, what you've been hearing about is Chris Lawing, and how Chris Lawing has been treated unfairly by the system, and Chris Lawing was railroaded by the police. Well, ladies and gentlemen, she's the reason that you've been here for the last week, okay? Don't forget that. She's the girl, and I say girl because she was 20 years old at the time, okay? She was still a girl. She's the girl who is in love with that man right there, Chris Lawing. She's the girl who, unfortunately for her, unfortunately for her friends, unfortunately for her family, and unfortunately for that baby, got pregnant by Christopher Lawing. She's the girl who that man, Chris Lawing, said was going to ruin his life. She's the girl that he felt was the end to his life as he knew it. His playboy party ways, his going out to the club, his picking up girls, his revolving door of women, all the free sex he can have in college was over because he's about to be a daddy, okay? She's the one that was going to keep him from his dream of being a military man, in his mind. She's the one who was afraid to go and see Chris Lawing. Now, they can try to minimize that all they want, but the fact of the matter is the only competent and reliable evidence that you have heard over the last week is that that young lady was scared to go see him. And you know that because they said she wasn't going to his dorm room. And we're going to get back to that because it kind of plays into some other things when we start talking about the elements of the crime in this case, okay? And I'll go back to something else that Miss Visser said, that Chris Lawing could charm the panties off a nun, okay? So if he can charm the panties off a nun, don't you think he thinks he can get Lacoy McQueen to do whatever he wants her to do? And if she isn't going to do that, don't you think that's, in his own words, going to piss him off? Now, she's also the girl that, after she told Chris Lawing she was going to keep that baby, is dragged out into the woods off of US 1 in Kittrell, North Carolina. This young lady right here is the person, and you've heard a lot of abstract testimony about bones. Those bones are that young lady, okay? Those bones, that young lady is the one when those medical examiner and the Vance County Sheriff's Department and all of the police officers who arrived on the scene out in Vance County said, these bones are scattered over 3 acres. Bones have been destroyed by animals. Don't forget that those bones are that young lady, Lacoy McQueen, okay? Now, she's also the girl whose killer has escaped justice for nearly 20 years. Now, they can try and put the blame on me for that and say that I'm trying to railroad somebody. I'll tell you the truth. This case had the evidence that it had. And if you're upset that it wasn't charged for 20 years and that the defendant wasn't brought to trial for 20 years, that's fine. Be upset. But don't take it out on Lacoy McQueen. Take it out on me. Be mad at me. Write me a letter. Write a letter to my boss, Miss Freeman, and say, you know what? That case should not have been sitting around for 20 years. Do something to Mr. Latour about that. Fine. I'll deal with the consequences of that. But don't take that out on Lacoy McQueen. And for 1 second, don't take that as an indictment of the evidence in this case, because you've heard the evidence in the case. Okay? The evidence in the case, I would submit to you, is pretty strong, and it leads you to one conclusion: that Lacoy McQueen was killed, and that she was killed by that man, Christopher Lawing. Now, Ms. Visser talked and gave you a lot of things a moment ago of the problems with our case, and I want to go through and address a few of those things so that we can get those behind us and move on to the things that are important in this case, which are the facts of the case and what they really show you, and how those facts apply to the law in this matter. Now, they want you to believe that Chris Lawing is an innocent man and that he's innocent because she walked away and got into a blue car. But you know, you're the ones who are going to have to judge the credibility of folks and decide who you believe and what stories you believe. Now, you've heard a lot of evidence about Lacoy McQueen. Does she seem like the kind of person that was getting into a blue car with random 2 guys? And does the description of the blue car even make any sense to you? It's an old blue car with wheels on it, driven by a black guy of no description other than he's black, and another black guy in the back seat of the car. The rest of that story that the defendant can't even keep straight when he's talking to the police is he doesn't know if the car stopped, if it's driving, if she flags it down, if it came from this way, what way the car came from. All he knows is she got in a blue car and drove off. Now, isn't that convenient? Isn't that convenient for the defendant? The girl that's going to ruin his life just happens to get into a random blue car of no description, drives off with two random guys of no description, and is never seen from again, never heard from again. Whose problems went away that day? The defendant's problems went away that day, didn't they? He's the only one that there's ever been any evidence wanted to kill somebody or had a motive to kill anybody. There was a lot of things that were posited to you by Ms. Visser a moment ago about that blue car and what those awful people did to her in the blue car, and they raped her, and we know that because there's a pair of underwear in the woods, and we know that because there's an extra sock. And I want to be clear about these socks. The evidence was there were two socks that matched and one random sock in the woods by the highway. We know two of those socks are Lacoy McQueen's, and how do we know that? We know that because her bones are still in the socks. So this random black man rapist from a blue car decided he was going to be in a hurry to get dressed and leave one sock in his underwear behind at the crime scene? That doesn't make any sense. What makes sense is this is the woods. There are hunters out there. You're by the highway. Trash goes on the highway. There's trash all in those woods. They made a big deal in opening statements you heard about shotgun shells. Well, they didn't mention that to you just now in closing arguments, did they? Why? Because every single person who got on the witness stand and told you about those woods said, it's a hunting area. She wanted you to believe that that trail leads back to these power lines because CP&L or Duke Power or whoever is back there working on it. No, they lead back there because every one of them told you, all I know is hunters use that road. Hunters use shotgun shells, okay? Trash is in the woods, okay? And unfortunately for Lacoy McQueen, that's what Chris Lawing thought she was, trash. And he put her in the woods just like all that other trash because he had killed her and he didn't want to be bothered with her anymore. And that's what the evidence in this case shows you. Now, another big thing that they like to point to and that she wanted to point to is the blood. She doesn't have a good answer for the blood. Chris Lawing does not have a good answer for you for the reason that that blood is in the room. And the reason he doesn't have a good answer for you about why the blood is in that room is because there's only one reason why the blood's in that room. He hurt her in that room. You know that he's done it before because you heard two people testify that they saw it, that they saw him grab her, they saw her push her against the wall. And to that, we go back to credibility. Stephanie Jeffries, the roommate, she was very emotional when she was up here on the stand. Showed her a picture of Lacoy McQueen's tennis shoes and her watch and her chapstick and her shoes. And what'd she do? Flip the picture over because she couldn't look at it because it made her stomach upset. 20 years later, these people still care. 20 years later, these people still love that young girl right there, okay? That's why they're here today. That's why they've been here every day of this trial. They aren't here to try and pin this on somebody that they don't like. They were here to tell you the truth. And how do you know it's the truth? You know it's the truth because they told that to the police back then. They told it to you today. Everything stayed the same for 20 years. They tried to trip her up and say, well, you don't remember these things, you know, you're having a hard time remembering. What'd you have for breakfast that morning? What'd you have for dinner that night? And what was her answer? My breakfast didn't go missing that day. My dinner didn't go missing that day. My roommate, my best friend, went missing that day. Was Stephanie Jeffries excited that she was going to have a roommate that had a baby? Yeah. She told you it was the first one of their group that was going to have a baby, and they made a plan. They were going to help that woman, that girl, raise a baby the best that they could. And I would submit to you, that's not something to hold against her. It wasn't a Freudian slip. The Freudian slip occurred when Ms. Visser was up here arguing to you and she told you about the blue car, and she said, Lacoy would never get in, and she stopped. And she said, well, if she were thinking right, she wouldn't have got in a blue car. No, she had it right the first time. Lacoy would have never gotten into that blue car with somebody she didn't know. She never would have gotten in the blue car. Her roommates told you she had 50 cents on her, but she would walk. She would have walked home if it were that bad, okay? The other big thing is that the May 10th, the blood in the room, like I said, and I got sidetracked on that, and I'm sorry, but the blood in the room. How do you know that the blood in the room got there on the 16th of May? I'll tell you how you know that the blood in the room got there on the 16th of May. The defendant, when he was having his room searched, 7 days after that, by CCBI and the Raleigh Police Department, they gave you a description. And they said he was acting real nervous, sweating, visibly shaking. 2 people told you that. Visibly nervous. And he spontaneously said, what are y'all doing? What are you looking at? And what was his statement? Chris Lawing told them on the day that they're searching, and I'm going to quote for you exactly what they said. Lacoy has never been in my room. She said she knocked on the door once, but I wasn't here. She has never been in this room. Her roommates told you she'd never been in that room. Chris Lawing's told you she's never been in that room. Jason Hilger said he had never seen her in the room before the 16th. And Jason Hilger, for what he was, told you a lot of things, and he was very non-committal, and that's understandable. He wouldn't say for sure that that was Lacoy McQueen, but what he did say, it looked a lot like her, and I know it wasn't Stephanie Kelly because I know Stephanie Kelly, and she would have said hello to me, and I would have said hello to her because I've talked to her a lot. They've only been in that room less than a week at this point, okay? And so that's how you know that it was Lacoy McQueen, because that Jason Hilger saw. Jason Hilger says, I see a woman who looks a lot like Lacoy McQueen that I know is not Stephanie Jeffries. And then you get this DNA testing done later that says, pretty definitively, I would submit to you, Lacoy McQueen's been in that room. And the defendant has told you she's never been in my room before. She's never been in this room. So there's only one day she could have been in that room. And the only day she could have been in that room was the 16th. And how did she get into that room? She got in that room because Christopher Lawing charmed the panties off a nun and made that poor, scared young lady come back to that room. She said, I'm not going to the room. She was adamant that she was not going to go to that room to her roommate. She said, I'm going to meet him because I understand. I'm going to meet him at the bell tower. Don't worry, I'll be safe. But we know she ends up in the room on the 16th. And we know that when they're in the room on the 16th, they're having an argument. And we know that because, again, the defendant looks at his roommate Jason Hilger and says, we need a couple minutes. And he walks in and sees this going on and says, I'm out of here, picks up his wallet and leaves. Okay? He's gone for several hours that night. We also know that Lacoy McQueen and the defendant had gotten into an argument. 1, because the defendant tells you they did. 2, because Stephanie Kelly told you they did. Stephanie Kelly, when she was questioned, said, and she read that in the police report, and she said, well, Chris, why do you look so upset today? And this is about the 16th. And he said, I just got into an argument with that girl from Shaw. Okay? So clearly we know they're fighting. We know he's upset. By his own admission, he's pissed off. We know her blood's in the room. I mean, come on, folks. It's pretty clear what happened that day. Then we start talking about the pebbles, the rocks, and how I didn't want you to see the pebble, and I'm trying to hide this stuff from you. If I was trying to hide it from you, I wouldn't have put it into evidence for you to hear about it, now would I? If I was trying to hide it from you, I would have never asked those questions. I'm the one that told you about the rocks in the room. I'm the one that told you about the blood in the room. I'm the one that told you about the blood on the carpet. Not them. I'm the one that put that evidence in. I'm the one that told you those things. How big do you think these rocks could possibly have been? A big deal is being made about how tiny these pebbles are, and that I didn't want you to see them because I didn't want you to see how small they are. Now, what sense does that make? I told you where the pebbles were found, didn't we? I said, the pebbles are in the bottom of his boot. We think these are boulders that he's carrying around in the bottom of his boot, for Pete's sake? No, they're pebbles. That's why they're still in the bottom of his boot. It's the only thing that makes sense in this case. And that's what you have to keep asking yourself, and you have to keep thinking about it. What makes sense in this case? What is a reasonable conclusion in this case? What is the only viable and reasonable conclusion in this case? And when you look at it all, and you look at it all in the totality of it, there's only one conclusion that makes any sense at all. And there's only one conclusion that any of the evidence in this case supports. And that conclusion is that the defendant, Christopher Lawing, was pissed off that she was not going to get rid of that baby, and he decided, I'm going to kill her. Now, a lot, too, was made of Detective Grodi, and she even called him a liar to you. You guys saw Detective Grodi, and you finally saw Detective Grodi. You realized who Detective Grodi was when he got on the witness stand, okay? And Detective Grodi, what did he tell you? She tried to make this big deal. The defendant tries to make this big deal. You were trying to get people to make agents of the state and come back, and you were going to say, tell me everything that you know. No. When he kept reading the report that they gave to him to read, what did he say? He said, look, you may find out that Chris Lawing didn't do this. And if you find out Chris Lawing didn't do it, let me know. Because if you let me know, I can move on and start trying to figure out something else, because everything else we're running down is not working, and everything else that we're running down is leading me to the conclusion that Chris Lawing has done this. But if you get some new information that says he didn't do it, by God, I want to know about it so that I can move on. Now, is that if he was trying to frame Chris Lawing, and let's be real about it, that's what they're saying. The police is trying to frame Chris Lawing because he's an easy mark. And I'll tell you, he is an easy mark. Here's why he's an easy mark. Because he did it. If they were trying to frame him, why would they say, if you find out he didn't do it, come tell me? If they were trying to frame him, they would say, if you find out he did it, he didn't do it, keep that to yourself. I don't want to know that. Okay? That's not what was going on. And he turned bright red. He didn't turn bright red. I mean, you guys saw him. He was calm. He answered her questions. She tried to make the answer something that she wanted them to be, which they simply were not. What he was doing, he said, and he explained it perfectly to you. He said, look, we've asked you about Chris Lawing. You're now going to look at him probably a little differently, because now you're going to be, oh, did my buddy kill this girl? I don't know. And you may even get a little brave, and you may say, hey, did you kill him? And if you do, quite frankly, that is a brave thing to ask somebody, isn't it? If you think they killed somebody, don't you think it's kind of crazy to say, did you kill that person? Because you know they already killed one person. Maybe they're going to kill you. Okay? So these are things to think about when you're judging the credibility of these folks. Another thing that she said is that Chris Lawing was not a dumb kid. And that's true. Chris Lawing is not a dumb kid. And you know Chris Lawing is not a dumb kid because he planned and executed this murder. And he got away with it for 20 years. So now, you've heard a lot of tale about circumstantial, and this is a circumstantial case, and when you're moving along in your life, sometimes throughout your life you'll hear, but that's just circumstantial. You know, they ain't got nothing, it's just a circumstantial case. Well, I'd submit to you this isn't just a circumstantial case. You've got some direct evidence in this case. You've got witnesses who say saw him assault her before. Stephanie Jeffries, they tried to paint her as making that up because she didn't tell anybody about it for a long time. But you notice when Richard Angelo Enoch got up there, the farmer got up there, and he said the exact same thing. He was in the room and saw it, and he said, I hadn't talked to Stephanie Jeffries in 20 years, since 1996. Did they ask him any questions? 0 questions. So when Stephanie Jeffries tells you it, she's a liar. When Richard Enoch tells you the exact same thing, he's telling you the truth. Does that make sense? What makes sense is it's the truth, because they hadn't talked about it in 20 years, and they both have told you the same thing, just like everybody else in this case. Now, circumstantial, there are two types of evidence. There's direct and there's circumstantial. So direct evidence is an actual knowledge of a fact. Okay? That means I saw it. I observed it. I know it to be true. Eyewitness testimony. Physical evidence in a case would be direct evidence to a fact. All right? Circumstantial evidence is the second kind of evidence. Circumstantial evidence is proof of a chain or group of facts and circumstances indicating the guilt or innocence of a person. The common law school way that they try to teach you this is about the rain, and they say, direct evidence is I'm looking outside and I see the rain falling. Circumstantial evidence would be I hear the rain outside, I see you walk in with a wet umbrella. Both of them, you're pretty daggone sure it's raining outside, right? But they're different ways to get to the same conclusion. Now, the question for you becomes, what's the difference between these two types of cases, or these two types of evidence when it comes to the law? The answer is pretty simple. None. The judge is going to tell you about direct and circumstantial evidence, and what I believe he's going to tell you is that there's no difference given to them in the law. They're just two different ways to get to the same conclusion. The law makes no distinction between the weight that's to be given to direct or circumstantial evidence. Treat them the same. It's up to you to decide how much you want to give to them. When I talk about circumstantial evidence, I'm brought back to kind of what the defendant and Ms. Visser would have you believe. And they kind of try to knock a piece of evidence away here and say, well, this isn't reliable. Then they can move on to the next one and say, well, this one's probably not reliable either, because this might have happened over here, and this might have happened over here, and then on the third piece of evidence, this might have happened. So you got to discount all of them. Well, think about it and ask yourself, okay, maybe one thing, I could see that happening. Okay. Maybe two things, I could see that happening. You start getting into 3, 4, 5 things that are all leading you to the same conclusion, it starts to carry a little weight, doesn't it? And when all of the circumstantial evidence in this case, what the people are telling you, the facts and circumstances surrounding Lacoy McQueen, that the defendant's the last person to see her, that the defendant is the one who's upset with her, that the defendant is familiar with the area where the body is found. And we know that because Alexa Hunt, who again they had no questions for, said we used to ride straight up US 1 right through Kittrell. I think she even called it a podunk town at the time. She said we used to ride straight through that little podunk town going to Henderson to visit my mom. And she dated him before all of this happened. Okay, so he knows this area. This area is in his head. He's thinking this is a rural area, 2-lane road, nothing but woods. When you start thinking about all these circumstances, they start leading you to a conclusion, don't they? And they start leading you to the conclusion that he did it. He's the only one that could have done it, and he's the only one that wanted it done. So, again, these two types of evidence are equal in the eyes of the law. Now we get to the heart of the matter. As we said, it's your job to find the facts in the case, and it's the judge's law to give you the law, and you're going to have to apply the facts to that law. We get into first-degree murder. This is what first-degree murder is. In order for me to, or for you to convict the defendant of first-degree murder, I've got to prove these things to you. I've got to prove to you that Christopher Lawing intentionally, with malice, premeditation, and deliberation, killed Lacoy McQueen. That's it. And we talked about that when we were selecting the jury, and you all promised that those are the law, or that's the law, those are the elements that you're going to hold me to. Nothing more and nothing less. And I say that because you might have a question, and this is the question that you might have. Notice what's missing. I do not need to prove exactly how Lacoy McQueen was killed. I don't have to do that to you. That's not required by the law. And you all promised, and you all took an oath, that you would hold me to the law and nothing else. So if that's the question that you have, it's not for your concern, I would submit to you in this matter, okay? What you need to do is you need to consider those elements that you're required to consider. And I don't need to prove to you exactly where he killed her. Again, not an element of the crime. And I can't tell you exactly how he killed her, because I can't. And I'll tell you why I can't. Because Chris Lawing is a smart guy. Chris Lawing did a daggone good job of destroying the evidence in this case when he took her body out in the woods so she could get eaten by animals. That's a pretty good way of getting rid of a body. And you heard from the medical examiner when he said he looked at all the evidence in the case and he said, he said the only reasonable conclusion is that they put the body out there for it to be hidden, to conceal the cause of death, and that in his opinion, the only logical conclusion was that it was a homicide.
Objection, that's not evidence.
And he also told you that he was missing a lot of the bones that would have been very helpful to him to tell you that. And I say that because he's missing the hyoid bone. What's a logical inference that you can draw from the evidence in this case about how this crime was committed? He lured her back to that room by charming her, using his suave techniques, as he told you, he's got with the ladies, right? Convinced her to get back in that dorm room so he could get her away from other people. Got her in that dorm room. When the roommate shows up, he says, "Hey, give me," and you heard him say, "Give me a couple of hours. Give me a couple of hours." So Jason Hilger leaves. He's already paged Stephanie Kelly, and we know that he's already paged Stephanie Kelly because Stephanie Kelly told you she got off work at 5 o'clock, that she was heading straight from work to see Chris Lawing because he had paged her. We know that she didn't get there till after 6 because she had to go pick up her son at daycare, and we know that Stephanie Kelly's alive, or that Lacoy McQueen is alive and in that dorm room at 5:30 when Jason Hilger gets home. So he's already paged Stephanie Kelly, the girl whose car he's going to borrow to get rid of this body. He assaults her in the room. That's why there's blood in the room. He somehow gets that body to the car. And how did he get the body to the car? Well, you heard this is move-in week. They've moved into the dorms. People are moving around. There's not a lot of people there. So it's logical that he can get that body to the car when the car is parked right in front of the dorm, right at the door. You get the body out, you get the body in the car. There's nothing found in the car. Maybe he's got her wrapped in something so that she doesn't leave any physical evidence behind. Because again, they've even told you, he's no dummy. He's a smart kid. He's thought this through. He knows what's going on. He's been thinking, she's not going to keep this baby. I cannot let her keep this baby. It's going to ruin my life. I've got to do whatever I can to get rid of this baby, even if it means getting rid of Stephanie Kelly. Getting rid of Lacoy McQueen. And I'm going to use Stephanie Kelly's car to do it. That's one way. And that way is consistent with the physical evidence in the case. That's why there will be blood in the room. That's why there's no cause of death. He strangles her to death. No hyoid bone to show you that. It's all consistent. Everything matches up. And when everything is matching up, it's leading you to the one conclusion. That Chris Lawing did it. Now, why am I not required to prove cause of death to you? It's a simple question, or it's a simple answer. And it's the answer in this case. Public policy says it's easy to destroy a body, and when you dispose of a body, you're disposing of the evidence. And in essence, if I were required to prove to you that the exact way somebody dies, when all you've got are bones and you know that someone was murdered, then you're basically giving them a windfall and saying, look, if you're good enough at getting rid of evidence, you're never going to get convicted. If you're good enough at getting rid of a body, you don't have to just kill away. Kill whoever you want to kill just as long as you can get rid of that body good enough. And that's not what you want, right? You want to have a standard. You need exact things that you can prove. And that's why we have the elements of the case. Now, first I have to prove to you that Chris Lawing did it, right? And I've gone through a litany of reasons why it all points to Chris Lawing, so I'm going to go through this one a little quicker. But he's the only person with motive. He's the only person with opportunity, because we all, let's be honest, I would submit to you, we all know that that blue car doesn't exist. The two black guys in the car don't exist. It's another one of his lies. He didn't want the baby. He had a bad temper with women. You heard that from Jason Queen, said that in the summer month, leading up to the summer of 1996, when they were rooming together, he was juggling balls, and he had a house of cards he had built, and his house of cards was tumbling down. All the girls were starting to find out his numbers were getting low, and he was getting pissed. And he was taking his anger out on those women. Said used to they would push him, and he would be smooth and be able to talk his way out of it. But the more they started to push, the madder he got. And this is an immediate relevant time right before Lacoy McQueen decided to push back. And when she decided to push back, he couldn't take it anymore, because this one wasn't just going to walk away and his numbers were going to go low. His numbers were about to go from 10 or however many girls he had to one baby, and that he was going to be taking care of that one baby for the next 18 years. You know they had the prior assault. We've talked about that. You know they've had the deteriorating relationship. You heard the horrible things that he would tell to her on the phone. You're knock-kneed, pigeon-toed. I don't want a baby to come out looking like that. You're awful. You're a terrible person. I want to videotape this abortion. And they try to give you this excuse about why he wanted to videotape the abortion, because she was going to be a doctor, and she wants to watch them kill her baby. No, that's not what it was. And it doesn't have anything to do with his grandpa having surgery either. The reason he wanted to videotape that abortion because he wanted to make sure that that baby was no longer something he was going to have to worry about. He's the last person to see her alive. Uncontroverted evidence. He's the last person to see her alive. Lied. My gosh, did he lie. She wanted to characterize it as fibbing. A fib is I didn't eat the cookie. Okay? A lie is when you have 15 different stories that you're telling to the police. Not only okay, and if you want to lie to the police, fine. But why did he lie to her roommates? Because he's making an alibi. She never came to see me. I'm calling you before you get up with me because I know you're going to be asking these questions. She never showed up. She never showed up. He keeps that story all the way till about 4 o'clock in the morning the day after, going into that Saturday, when he finally fesses up after he's been adamant for the last 2 days that he's never seen the girl. Okay, she showed up, but she got in a blue car, rode away. It doesn't make any sense. So he lies to everybody. This is a big one too. He never, ever helped anybody look for her. Ever. Never offered. When the police are asking him questions, never gives any help. Say, she got in a blue car. I'll try and help you go find the blue car. Let's go find the blue car. They were around this area. Maybe we can go over there and look for them. Oh my God, where is she? No. That's not what happened, is it? He never helped to find her. The blood's in his room. She's seen in that room, and as I said, she's never been in that room before, and you know that because even he tells you that. He knows the body dump area because of Alexa Hunt and the rock in his boots. So, okay, maybe the rock could have been from some other area, right? Maybe. That's not what she testified to, I would submit to you. She said it, in her opinion, it's from that area, and it was visually, she said, really looked like the rocks in that area. And she testified that, yeah, that's a big area, and the rocks look different in different areas of that, is the way I remember her testifying about it. And that there were certain things. It wasn't infill because it wasn't crusher rock, and you can look at the rock and tell, and there are these delicate points. It's not just it looked like the rock, could have been the rock. She said it really looks like the rock, in her expert opinion, of that junk science of geology that I would submit to you they teach in every university in the nation, and the U.S. government uses, and every major corporation in the United States likely uses for different purposes in their business. That junk science of geology, okay? It's not a junk science, folks. It's one of the oldest science, and she testified, one of the oldest sciences known to man is trying to figure out the way the earth works, okay? And one of the major techniques that they use is to go and visually examine rocks and say, I've studied and I know what this rock means, because she's an expert in that field. So It's not just a rock. It's a rock plus. It's a rock plus all his lies. Plus he knows the area. Plus he's the last person to see her. All of these things combined together. And really, who's this lucky? Your biggest problem in the world just goes missing on the day that it becomes your biggest problem in the world. And you never have to deal with this girl again. It doesn't make any sense that anybody else did this. Chris Lawing is the person involved. Intentionally. Now, intentionally is seldom proved by direct evidence. And this is why that circumstantial evidence is important, because you can't know what's in somebody's head, right? So you've got to, I can't know what you intend to do. I have to infer what you intend to do by looking at the circumstances and the facts that surround all of these things, right? And so that's what the law is going to tell you. Say it can be proved by circumstances from which it may be inferred. So you're allowed to infer things from the evidence. And in fact, you have to infer things from the evidence, because otherwise, how would you know what's in somebody's head? How would you know what they intended to do? And ways that you can infer, things that you can infer someone's intent from: the manner of the assault, the conduct of the parties, relevant facts and circumstances, like not wanting to have a baby, saying it's going to ruin your life. So here's some evidence of Chris Lawing's intent. As to the manner of the assault, like I said, we don't know specifically how the assault happened. You don't have to have all of those things. You can infer it from any or none of those things. You might infer it from something else that you saw or learned during the trial. But when you get to the manner of the assault, she's a pregnant woman, and we know that. We know that assault occurred because there's blood in the dorm room, and it's and a statement was made about the size of the blood. It was visible blood so that CCBI saw it, the detective saw it. When the person from LabCorp got the carpet, she said she saw a red stain in the carpet, and all of them said it appeared to be blood. They did a phenolphthalein test on it, came back presumptive for blood. The question was, well, don't those give false positives? Couldn't it have been something else? And they said, well, no, you got DNA from it, it's blood. And that's what they told you. They said, yeah, you can get false positives, but if it's a false positive, you're not going to get DNA from it. So, we know that there's blood in the room. We know that it's from an assault. The victim, by all testimony, was a little girl, 5'4", knock-kneed, pigeon-toed, right? And that was described. Difficulty moving, because you don't have free range of motion of your legs. She's susceptible to the assault. She's with child, susceptible to the assault. The defendant was a big guy, still is a big guy, but then he was younger. You heard Jason Queen, and you saw Jason Queen. Jason Queen's not a little guy. Remember his roommate? He got up there and was telling you all about how the defendant was having sex in the room, and he said, he got mad at me one day, and I thought we were going to come to blows, but I didn't want to fight him. He was a big guy. If Jason Queen doesn't want to fight him, imagine 5'4", pregnant, knock-kneed, pigeon-toed Lacoy McQueen, and what chance she stood going against Chris Lawing. There was no evidence that Lacoy McQueen provoked any violence towards her. He didn't tell you she tried to assault him. He didn't tell the police that she attacked me. No injuries were observed on the defendant right after this event. Zero evidence of provocation by her. The only provocation that she gave him was going against what he wanted and saying, I'm going to keep this baby. Now, is that provocation to kill somebody? When you see your life is flashing before your eyes, you're thinking about these things, right? More evidence of his intent. You look at the conduct. She didn't want to go to the room because she was worried how he was going to react when she told him. That's pretty important, folks. Prior violence between them. He's already put his hands on her once. It's likely that he's the one that did it again. Berating conversations about the pregnancy. I mean, you heard those awful things that they were saying that he would say to her on the phone. And they're just awful things. To someone that you love, someone that you're supposedly in a relationship with. Ruining his life, gonna have that baby. Relevant circumstances. She told him she wanted to keep the baby. Made it clear he didn't want the baby. And they want to tell you, well, he wasn't sure if he wanted to have the baby. He knew he didn't want to have that baby. How do you know he knew that? All the roommates said they heard him on the phone telling her, I don't want this baby. I'll pay for you to have an abortion. Get rid of the baby. The baby's going to ruin my life. When he started having questions about whether or not he wanted to have the baby was when he couldn't remember what he wanted to tell the police. Because when the police start asking who wanted to have the baby is when the story starts changing. First it's, well, I didn't want to have it. Well, I was okay with having the baby. But then when he finally comes around and when they would submit he's being fully honest, he finally says, okay, look, I didn't want to have that baby. I didn't want to have the baby. So we know he didn't want to have the baby. Charming. Wanted to lure her back into the room because he knew what he was going to do. Get her out of the public area into a private area. She's told him by the bell tower, I'm keeping the baby. Can't kill her out here. Too many people. Got to get her back to my room where it's secluded. It's the only other place he's got. He's thinking it through because he says when his roommate comes home, give me a couple hours. Not give me a minute. We're in the middle of something. Hey, Jason, we're kind of having an argument. Can you come back in a minute, when we're done? This won't be long. I'm going to take her home. Give me a couple hours. That's telling. Telling to his state of mind, what he's thinking about doing at this point in time. Malice. It's the next element that I have to prove to you. All right? Malice is not only hatred or ill will or spite. It is those things, but not only those. It's also a condition of mind that makes the person kill another intentionally or inflict serious bodily injury harm, or bodily harm, which is the approximately results in another's death. Okay? So ask yourself, was there hatred or ill will between Lacoy and Chris? All the evidence says there was, right? All the evidence. He even says, everyone know we argue. Nobody knows my business, but everybody knows we argue. That's why I lied to you, because I didn't want y'all to look at me wrong because everybody knows we fight. They fight, and he killed her. He didn't like her. He had malice. He had hatred. He hated her because she was going to keep that baby and ruin his life. That day they argued, even by his own admissions. And what better way is there to show that you don't care about somebody or you have hatred or ill will than to dump their body out in the woods for animals to eat? That's not something you do to somebody you like, somebody you love, somebody you respect. That's something you do to somebody that you are upset with. Somebody that you hate. Somebody that you have ill will towards. We also have to prove to you that the defendant was the proximate cause of the victim's death. And proximate cause is meaning without Christopher Lawing's actions that day, Lacoy McQueen would not have died. Simple, right? He caused her to die. What evidence do we have of that? She was a healthy 20-year-old girl when she left that day. She never came home. But for meeting Chris Lawing that day, she's still alive when she leaves. There's no other explanation for her death. The medical examiner even told you all that stuff. They've even admitted to you, essentially, that Lacoy McQueen was killed, right? They're just saying he didn't do it. So whatever happened to her killed her. So that was the proximate cause. So the question for you is, who did it? And the only logical conclusion is Chris Lawing. Not these two guys in a blue car with no description. Dr. Lehman told you that the only viable cause of death was that of a homicide, right? He didn't have a dog in this fight at all. He just looked at the bones and is telling you what's going on, what he saw. Now you move on to premeditation. And the judge is going to give you a definition of premeditation. And premeditation is the intent to kill formed over some period of time, however slight. Now, what that does not mean is that does not mean they have to have written out a plan, a manifesto of how they intend to kill somebody. All it means is they had to have said, I'm killing you, and kill him, however slight. Even if it's during the course of the assault, if they could stop the assault and walk away, and they don't, they're assaulting them, like, man, I shouldn't be doing this. But they keep strangling them, keep choking, squeezing the life out of them. That is however slight. That millisecond, that split-second decision. The next is deliberation. Deliberation is defined as a cool state of mind. And you look at the evidence of premeditation and deliberation, meaning not arising out of a sudden violent fit or rage or something like that. The evidence here is that the defendant was not arising out of some sudden violent rage, right? This is a situation where the defendant or where the victim in the case was keeping the baby. He thought about that, thought about how it was going to ruin his life, and decided, I need to take action and I need to end this situation. This is a crime of greed, a crime of selfishness. This is not a crime of passion. Okay? So this is an examples. It's not an exclusive list, but you look at the passion of these people, the lack of provocation, the brutal nature of the killing, and the ill will. So as you can see, you can take certain factors and apply them to all the different elements of the crime, right? So certain pieces of evidence fit in different pieces of the puzzle for you. And so we've already talked about the ill will and the brutal nature. He's assaulting a pregnant woman who stands little chance to fight back. There's no evidence that she provoked him. All the evidence is he thought about this, he's upset, he's decided she's taking my life from me and I need to end this situation. So those are ways in which you can look at that. So some of the things that they're going to tell you is you can look at the conduct of the parties, and you can look at the conduct of the parties before, during, and after the crime. Okay, so you're not stuck with the conduct as the assault's being committed. You can look at what they did before that lets you know they've been thinking about this. And in this case, before, he lured her back to the hotel room, or back to the dorm room. He's a smooth talker. They've been arguing. You know he's upset. He paged Stephanie Kelly to get the car. I need the car here so I can get rid of the body. And he asked Jason Hilger for hours. Again, we don't know what happened exactly during the assault, but we do know that an assault occurred and that there's blood on the carpet. Now, the real thing where you start seeing issues for the defendant is when you start looking at his conduct after the fact. And when you look after, you see he concealed the crime by disposing of the body. What better evidence is there that he had thought about this than that he knew he had to get a car there, he had to get her in that car, and he had to get her out of town so she wouldn't be found. And you know he's been thinking about it because Kittrell, North Carolina ain't something that just pops in your head when you're thinking, I'm going to get rid of this body, is it? When you're thinking, I'm going to get rid of the body, you're at Pullen Park. I'm going to take her to Pullen Park. I'm going to dump her in the water. I'm going to do something like that. No, I got to get this thing away from me, and I got to get it as far away from me as possible. And I know an area. I know an area where I used to go with Alexa Hunt when we would ride through there. There ain't nothing up there. Okay? There's just a bunch of woods and 2 lanes. Nobody will find her out there. He takes her out there. He's thought about this. Lied to the roommates. And I say he attempted to make an alibi by contacting them, right? I mean, he calls on her phone the day after he knows that and says, she never showed up. Weird, right? He's trying to let them know, I never saw her. And you know that's a lie because he later confesses that's a lie. So again, maybe you can say, I can understand him lying to the police. They're going to look at this wrong and say, domestic violence, they're going to assume I did this. But why would you lie to the roommates? Especially if she got in the blue car with these guys. If that's a true story, wouldn't you say, well, she showed up. She got in the car with these dudes. Y'all might want to look for these other guys, right? You're not going to say, well, she didn't show up. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. He gives them a wrong number, and they want to say, well, he just learned his number. But what else do they tell you? He's not a dumb guy. And if you're ever given a wrong number to somebody, if you're going to give a fake number to somebody, what do? You make it just a little bit close to yours so you got plausible deniability. He's planning ahead. He's thought this stuff out. He said, I'm going to give him a wrong number because I don't want him to be pestering me when I'm over here with Stephanie trying to get a little action the next day, because he's so worried about her getting in the blue car with these people. He brings his next girl over and they go bowling and watch movies and have sex and hang out. He doesn't care about Lacoy McQueen. And he even tells Detective Proctor, I love that girl to death. No, you don't. You don't care. Well, you did love her to death because you killed her. But you didn't love her. Okay? You didn't care about her. She was an impediment to his freedom. So he gives the wrong number, which is just slightly off. So he's got plausible deniability. Thought it through. Lies to the police many times. When the police are around the first day, he's acting nervous, shaking, sweating, won't look anybody in the eye, acting crazy. Y'all have seen him the whole trial. Does he look nervous to you guys? He ain't a nervous kind of guy, right? He's just been smiling and having a good time. He's not.
Ladies and gentlemen, just please
He's not the kind of guy I would submit to you that's not keeping eye contact and shaking and sweating if he doesn't have anything to hide. Okay? He refuses to help find her. He contacted the witness afterwards, and Detective Grodi told you about that. He says, they wanted to make it sound like Detective Grodi's out there saying, come tell me things, I want to know what you know. No, he said, these people came to me and were like, look, man, Chris Lawing knows y'all are talking to me, and he keeps coming up saying, what did the police ask you? What do they know? Why does he want to know what the police know, but he won't help them find her? The other thing is, and I found it interesting, and you guys read this in the direct transcript of the defendant's statement to Detective Proctor. Detective Proctor asked him, says, is there anything else you think you ought to let me know? And what was his response to that, or that you would like, that we need to know? And he says, I sure would like to know what y'all know. He said, you what? You want to know what I know? He says, yeah, and I'd like to find out where Lacoy is. Lacoy's an afterthought. He wants to know what they know so that he can stay one step ahead of the police because he's not a dumb guy. And it worked for him for 20 years. Now we get into, and this is a long list, folks. I'm sorry, but you get into the defendant's lies. Last time he saw her was on the 10th outside of Wolfmart. They want you to say that he went to the room, that she went to the room that day. But you guys read that too. You read that. That was in the transcript, right? You heard the testimony. She said, what he actually said about the 10th was, I was in the Wolfmart playing video games. She appeared outside. I was like, oh, what are you doing out here? And we walked around and we talked. And she left. Nowhere in that did he say she went to the room on the 10th. Nowhere. But he tells her that's the last time that he saw her. We know that's a lie. Then he changes it to, she never showed up on the 16th. She was supposed to come, but she never showed up. Tells that to the roommates and the police. Lies. Okay, you got me. She showed up at the bell tower, but we never went to the room. We argued outside and we walked around, and then she got in the blue car. Tells the roommates he's in Virginia. When we know that's not true, he's not in Virginia. He says, another lie to the roommates for no good reason, unless he killed her. I'm in Virginia, but where is he? He's hanging out with Stephanie Kelly, bowling and watching movies and hanging out in the dorm room. Why are you lying to the roommates and saying you're in Virginia? And at this point, you know she's missing. Okay? If you didn't know she was missing before, all the evidence, because the roommates are like, she didn't come home. She's with you. And he's still lying to her. So you can't use this as an excuse to say, well, I didn't know she was missing at that point. No, he knows, and he's still lying. Says he called them and left them messages on the 16th, but you heard me ask the roommates, he said, y'all had access to her voicemail, didn't you? I said, yeah. They said, we sat by the phone all day, all night. Nobody called. He never called. We checked the voicemail. He never left a voicemail, but he told the police he did, but he didn't do it. Why? Because he knows it looks bad that he didn't call. He knows it looks bad that it doesn't stick to his story that he's the concerned boyfriend at this time. Then you get back to this blue car, which the description is ridiculous, and he can't even keep it straight. And he keeps talking about, doesn't know where it is, if it was moving, flagged, doesn't know where it goes. First, he doesn't know who's in the car. There's one guy, then it's two guys, one in the front seat. And what car's riding around in Raleigh with a guy in the front seat and a guy in the back seat? There's no evidence it was a taxi cab. Guy in the front seat, guy in the back seat, and they're just riding around Raleigh. It doesn't make any sense. And then she gets in the front seat of the car, according to him. It doesn't make any sense. Doesn't answer his phone or his pages. They're calling him and paging him and paging him, and he's refusing to answer the phone. In fact, when the police show up, he says, no, you can't go in the room because my roommate's asleep. But then when they say, look, we're going in there, we need to go in the room and make sure she's not in there, he gives them a note saying his roommate's out of town. They go in the room, there's another girl in the room. In fact, when they first go to the room, they're knocking on the door and he doesn't answer. What's he doing? He's sitting in the room in the dark. And you heard that testimony from Detective Proctor, that when they key in the room, they've been knocking on this door trying to get him to answer, saying, police, and open the door. Nobody answers the door. They go key in and he's sitting in the room in the dark, just sitting there, awake, according to them. Doesn't make sense. Got nothing to hide. And at that point, he's telling you he doesn't know she's missing. So why is he not answering the door? He even told Richard Enoch that she wasn't pregnant. That doesn't make any sense unless he's talking about after he killed her, because she's no longer pregnant then. His quote, I never touched her in my life. We know that's a lie, don't we? We know that's a lie because of Stephanie Jeffries and because of Richard Enoch. They both told you they saw him touch her. Like I said, he was sitting in the room in the dark. He says, call me. Let me know if you find anything out. But then what's he do? He turns the ringer off on his phone, or turns his phone off in the room because he doesn't want to be bothered while he's watching movies. He knows where she is. He knows that she's in the woods. He knows that she's been dragged there. He knows that she's been killed. Sweating and pacing, never making eye contact. Flip-flopping around on who wanted to keep the baby, and we can't keep his story straight when he's talking to the police. Like I said, when he's asked if he had any questions, he wants to know what the police know. He always speaks about the pregnancy in the past tense. And yeah, sure, there were some spots in there where the questions are in the past tense, but he always says she was pregnant, until Detective Proctor said, she was pregnant? And he says, oh, she is pregnant. He knows she's not pregnant anymore because he killed her. And this one's interesting to me. If you've got nothing to hide, and your buddy, Richard Enoch, who I would submit to you is about as believable as anybody that came on that witness stand, even, so much so that they didn't even ask him a question on cross-examination, says, I tried to talk to Chris about Lacoy, and I tried to find out where she was and what happened and what he knew, because he was worried about her. And what did he say to him? I don't want to talk on the phone because I think it's bugged. If you didn't have anything to do with her being missing, what do you care if the phone's bugged? If all your story is she got in a blue car and left, you've already said that. What does it matter if the phone is bugged? Which it wasn't, but what does it matter if the phone's bugged? He also told Detective Proctor that he wanted to go to the amusement park after all this was going on to clear his mind. And I found it interesting that he said, this is my last week to do something before I go back to school. This is all evidence that the defendant is a selfish person, and that's the reason why he had to kill Lacoy, because she was going to interfere with his life. He tells the police that he thought she'd run off with the roommates because they oftentimes do that. We didn't run off. We didn't have any money to go anywhere. And they said if they did go someplace by happenstance to somebody's parents' house, Lacoy always called him and told him where they were going. Because if she didn't, he was going to be blowing their phones up wanting to know where in the world she is because he was possessive over her. Nobody believed him. Nobody. When he would tell these stories to his friends, sure, biased witnesses. They're going to say that her roommates are biased about it. Richard Enoch wasn't biased about this, was he? He said he was friends with Chris Lawing. He knew Lacoy, but he was friends with Chris. And Chris would tell him something, and the story would always change. He said he didn't believe him.
Objection.
So nobody believed him, right? So those are the elements that I have to prove to you. And if you look at that, they lead you to the only conclusions that the defendant believed that he needed to kill her and that he intended to kill her, and he did so with malice, premeditation, and deliberation. So that's the elements of first-degree murder, all right? Those are the elements that I have to prove to you, whether that be through direct or circumstantial evidence. Those elements and those elements alone. Now, I believe the judge is also going to instruct you on second-degree murder. Second-degree murder is a lot like first-degree murder, all right? It's just a lesser offense. And so if you look at second-degree murder, I have to show that Chris Lawing unlawfully, intentionally, and with malice wounded or killed Lacoy McQueen and was the proximate cause of her death. So what's missing from that? What's the difference between second-degree and first-degree murder? Basically, the difference is there's no specific intent to kill required, right? If he wounded her and the wound is the result, the thing that leads to her death, then that's enough too. No premeditation is required. I've given you all the reasons why he did premeditate, but if for some reason you don't think that he thought about this and said, I'm going to kill her, then that's not required for second-degree murder. No deliberation is required for second-degree murder, right? So if you think he had ill will towards her, he assaulted her and wounded her, which led and killed her, leading to her death, then he's guilty of second-degree murder. And so, like I said, if you find that Chris didn't mean to kill Lacoy, but he meant to injure her, or he intended to kill her, and he injured her with malice, that ill will, that injury caused her death, didn't mean to kill her, second-degree murder. So all the competent evidence in this case will show you two things. Will show you that Chris Lawing is the one that did it, and that Chris Lawing should be guilty of first-degree murder in this case. Chris Lawing thought about it. Chris Lawing planned it. Chris Lawing disposed of Lacoy McQueen after he had no more use for her. And when he realized that she was more of an impediment in his life and she was not going to be fun for him anymore, he threw her away like an old toy. So he's either guilty of first-degree murder, at a minimum, he's guilty of second-degree murder. But I would submit to you, and I would ask you all, after you've applied the facts in this case to the elements, that you find that the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. Thank you. Just like a minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you a chance to stretch your legs. I'm going to give you a 15-minute recess until noon. You're not getting jury deliberations, ladies and gentlemen, so please don't discuss this matter between now and noon. Leave your notebooks on your chair. Look forward to seeing you at noon. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.